Welcome to Between Film. In this dialogue, we're going to be focusing on a community. We're going to be going over things like what qualities and traits are needed to be a transformative leader in a diverse community, especially when we are communing and existing beyond colonized or religiously traumatized ideas and beliefs. These are just some of the many introspective questions we will explore as we begin to analyze the Disney film series Toy Story 1 through 4. We believe this film series speaks to the challenges, the leadership qualities, benefits, and complexities towards developing and maintaining, as well as investing in a 21st century community. All right, welcome to Between Film. This dialogue is going to be focusing on community. A community. Let me share the syllabus.
I'm glad to be here, really am. Just curious to see how Toy Stories 1 through 4.
Yes, we're excited to navigate that too. We were just going over the syllabus, and you just got us when we hit the rubric. So we're on page like 12. We were going over I guess this is important right here, where we were providing like these are considered like the Shaman notes, where we have like a kind of brief, short breakdown of the film and what we're kind of really trying to hyper focus on, because you could talk about a lot of things in these films. And we're really trying to develop and practice honing in on specific scenes that reflect these ideas that we want to highlight. So, pulling Toy Story together, we couldn't go off of like just the surface basic what it is, what it looks like. It kind of had to be watched so many times to make these deeper connections as to how these symbols represent things that are deeper and found in ourselves and all that. So we were saying how Toy Story from 1 to 4 cannot be compared to Matrix 1 to 4. Like Matrix, you could get the gist of the core in the first one, but with Toy Story, you only got a part of it in each movie. So like, you didn't get the full thing in Toy Story 1, because it starts out with Woody's identity issues, and that continues to even go deeper, through series 1 through 4, where you start to see him asking the deepest question, or one of the deepest questions, am I more than just a child's plaything? He's reaching, he's searching for self-identity and self-meaning and purpose beyond what he was accustomed to. So like when you're looking in retrospect from 1 to 4, you're like, dang, Woody actually grew a lot as a character, and in each one he was challenged with specific things, and even sometimes the same thing but in a different context. And that's what we want to talk about through this series, is really the character development and putting ourselves in the shoes of Woody. Right. And we can easily, move this analogy theopoetically across the board to say, a pastor to, their congregation, and really start thinking about, well, the stresses and the things we don't think about in leadership development, in these spaces, and how it affects our congregation, our group, our community, if we don't continue to develop ourselves. I think that's really like the heartbeat of this dialogue. So yeah, we just did for each one just something to kind of guide us when we're watching it or reviewing it. Like, oh yeah, maybe I didn't think about it like that, or maybe even challenge it. We would love that. If you find something that you think is like, you brought up something, but did you think about this? We would love that too, because that really helps everybody start to see it in a more multi-dimensional way. This isn't about we're just airing things. And yeah, just basic technology. Obviously, you're here, so you got it. The requirements, it's a 50-50. Online dialogues, 50% of the grade. Final project, 50% of the grade. We were talking about Jasenya's amazing project from the last series, which was a really good example. We were talking about why the final project's so creative that way, and it has that freedom so that things like that, amazing presentations, could just be created, and not suppressed and told to conform and stuff like that. So, really want people to, get playful with it and get into it. And we did, put a rubric together. And this is just really accountability for me, to make sure, we're doing what we're doing. I'm not like just picking who's a good student and who's bad. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? So, yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, our rubrics are pretty much the same. The only thing that changes is the topic, really. But it's basically the same outline. No shady legal business here. But it's pretty straightforward. Yeah, if you understand grades, you can look at that. Bibliography. So for this dialogue, we actually dived into a lot of books about community, the development of community, the philosophies behind establishing community. So I know a lot of people have their different opinions and whatnot, but just be open minded to a lot of these things because we've highlighted these books because we read through them and we have highlights and notes, to suggest that, there's something there, something to consider, beyond what, the author may have done or not done or something like that. So obviously there's Karl Marx there. There's some things that we believe he brings up that are important to at least talk about and consider in the 20th. We have The Art of Community, Seven Principles for Belonging. This was a really interesting book. It wasn't actually what I thought it was going to be. Actually, I admit we walked in with some preconceived biases, but amazing book. It's worth the read, to at least worth skimming. The way they do the outline, the chapters are pretty self-explanatory. Loved how the author really gets to the point in this book. So that's why we added it. Communitarianism, right? This is an idea that needs to be talked about, right? A lot of times we kind of shun it off, but let's talk about this. How can communitarianism be still relevant in the 21st century when we're talking about developing new or redeveloping traditional structures of community? We also have The Business of Belonging, How to Make Community for Competitive Advantage. This was an interesting book. We loved reading it because it was talking about how corporations had to think about developing communities. And like a lot of these communities were centered around customer service. Like you buy the product and now they're focused on how do you like the product? Is the product a part of your daily life kind of thing? And people feeling like they were belonging to something. That was like the biggest takeaway for corporations. And this book, obviously talks about that, how it's so much more than just what we think it is. Like they started it out trying to track, old customers, current customers, but it became so much more. They started actually being able to create culture in the background, and you see this like a lot with a lot of Fortune 500 companies, like, like Bloomingdale's, for example, right? Not everyone shops at Bloomingdale's, but it creates its own culture, especially the clothing that's allowed to be sold there. So there's a whole culture and community on an app because you're a member or you're a loyalty, whatever. And like you're part of this sub network, and these are still communities. And so we just don't think about it like that a lot. So this book helped us to think about, wow, there's so many dimensions to community. It's not just the one we always think about. The Art of Gathering was very deeply spiritual. Definitely recommend, reading that. Marx and Marxism, that's a really good one because the author actually is a Marxist, but a good scholar, a really good scholar because they are very objective about what Marx wrote about, and they talk in that manner. So that was really helpful. You weren't being like led down, an opinionated, biased view. The community, the structure of belonging, that was a dope as well. The Art of Community and Belong. Find your people, create community. This book, and Live More Connected Life. This book helped me early on in this doctoral process. Like, this book helped me really start understanding, what are you looking for? You may say community, like we use these words, but what does that really mean? What's that going to look like? So this book helped me a lot. So we just wanted to share these books. Uh, Last session we didn't, and we always try to come up with some good bibliographies, and we didn't do any justice because we didn't talk about it. So we wanted to at least take time to talk you through the books that we've been reading to inspire us to even start this dialogue.
I guess a quick question is, which
Yeah.
ones are the most approachable so that if you, let's say, are on a train, that you can pop it out and read it?
Good one. Good one.
If you were to select one or two that are the most approachable to get a gist of it, which ones would you choose?
Definitely. It would definitely be The Art of Community, Seven Principles for Belonging by Charles Vogt. That's a nice size. Like it could fit right in my blazer jacket sliding. But it's also digestible, something you can read while in transit or something, you know. The Art of Gathering, How We Meet and Why It Matters. That's another good travel size book, but the actual information is very simple. It flows. It's easy to pick up. Like she has some like one-liners, you know, and they're scattered throughout the page. It's really an enjoyable read. Those are my top two, I would say. The other ones, they're a little bulky, hard to get. If you do get them, you got to get hardcover. It's not good to travel with. The Karl Marx books, if I had to pick between them, it would be the Alan Wood. That would be the most travel size and really good to read on the go, quick here and there. We've tabbed that book up like crazy. Like it's just interesting on every other page. So those would be my top three, I guess, recommendations.
Great, great. Thank you.
Thank you. And of course, from last session, we thought that it makes sense to just keep this going. These Jungian terms and concepts. One session wasn't enough. Like there's so many terms that we're going to just continuously be bringing up that we need to think about, and continuously say, wait, what does that mean? Because, these are complicated ideas. This is not, super easy, but the way we're trying to alchemically convert it into something digestible, we still can't lose the complexity of it, So it does take time. So yeah, we just brought these lists over. We haven't updated the list for more words because we felt like we haven't even gotten halfway through these words from the last Between film. And some of them are just repetitive,
Just to let you know, Frank Herbert in his Dune series, the first book had a piece in the back with just terms. It doesn't matter. Every couple of books, he repeats it again. So because it requires, if you're going to be an avid reader of his work, he's creating these terms or he's bringing them in quite often. And sometimes if you don't know it, it can, cause the reader to just leave the book. So he would constantly put in these terms so that, oh, okay, I know I can start from there. And if there were any new readers, he made sure that first book had just what was needed to do that. So it's important to the repetition. I mean, that's very valuable. Very valuable.
Definitely. All right. So, we kind of got through the syllabus fairly quick. There was nothing, mysterious about it. But let's really get into like starting this dialogue. We've all seen Toy Story 1 at least. What are some ideas that you feel like you want to raise up that, you felt was important or maybe close to home for you emotionally or what have you, like meant something to you when watching that Toy Story 1 film?
I guess I'll go first. Yeah, since you mentioned the term of community and that collective becoming there, Toy Story has this back and forth of the community and that single person, that individual that has to really struggle against this idea that he is not the center. And he creates almost like a facade, right? That I'm not the center because the central figure is the boy, but everything channels through him. And for someone else to come in and to have a commanding aura, charisma about them that decentralizes him is something that any person, I'm not even talking about a leader, I think that's any person, whether it's in their job or in academia or in family. I mean, you can say when a child is born, everything. I mean, there's so many examples. They get displaced, that they're no longer the center of attention. And I think Toy Story really, if you were to look at, like you mentioned, on that deeper level, displays that struggle and some of the heights that we will go to get to get back into that position. And then what's necessary to say, I'm going to stay decentered. and what it brings about when we do that. So I think in that all throughout the films, there's that constant piece. But the first one really hits it home. What happens when I am no longer the center? And how I think you would say the ego, right? The ego really shows itself there. And so I think that first film does such a great job. The people who wrote it really had to think that one out and say, what do we teach children about that? What do we teach adults when we take this platform of the film as an educational piece, as much as an entertainment piece, as much as a community building component, things that spark conversation, such as now? It's that. How do I not become the center? How do I stay decentralized and allow others to shine, knowing that I was a part of that? If I can jump, I think it's in the third film that when they introduce the new girl and Woody is in this group that really knows how to share or work within a community environment where they're encouraging, well, that was awesome. Did you see this? Is it that? And here he is trying to go back to an older pattern, right? I need to go back. I need to go back. But he's existing in a community that is really valuable for him because it's teaching him, but this is what community looks like. When we're further displaced, when we're further decentralized, it's a massive shift. What happens, we say, when a child goes away to college, that question that the parent is no longer a central figure in that person's life, but must shift and say, oh, I can only provide wisdom. I can only provide advice now. I have to let them struggle in developing a budget or going through relationships and heartaches and breakups. But then knowing that there's a community there that helps them, and that the parent, and again, holding on to the example of the parent, that there's also groups for parents to be like, to cope with it as well. All of those parts is really, I call it decentralizing, but it's also saying, we don't have it all together. We just don't have it all together. We go through these phases. We go through these emotions. We need community. It's that community in the self, and it's that rhythm that goes back and forth. And I think Toy Story really handles that well. And I don't mean to jump, but you see that in Inside Out. There's no one person that can do it. All of those facets are necessary, that holistic piece. All of them are valid and important within the life of that, but it is that wholeness. And we see that in community. That's so important. So I'll pause because I can stay talking.
That was amazing, by the way. I think what I got from the movies, particularly the first movie, you kind of, obviously when you see these movies, you can see yourself or replay an experience that you were part of or you had seen from a different environment. But seeing how you can come from tradition. So like these toys never really went out, not until, Mr. Buzz Lightyear comes in to the story, and then Woody already having, or you can see him, he's portraying this leader. And everyone has their routines, Mr. Potato Head and his wife, everyone knows them. They're all coming out once the humans are gone. But then you can think about people, and even to bring it back to when you talk about the church, how do you move forward into this 21st century with these traditions, but then again, you're being faced with new challenges. So can these traditions fit this new narrative? Or is there things that you can try to work on or just implement just to kind of shapeshift it a little bit so that everyone does feel comfortable as a community? So yeah, like I saw him, I thought about like an older person. I thought about my parents, to be honest, but then he kind of gave in. I think a part of that is fear of change in a way, because you're so used to something, you're so comfortable with one way of, one lifestyle, if I put it that way. And then when you see, Andy, he's growing up, and just how the toys are then like donated to the other girl. So they're like moving around and stuff like that. So then you also think back to yourselves, like, like moving, how was that? Did you acclimate? Was it uncomfortable type of thing? But then it takes some time and then you meet new faces. But then I feel like towards the end of the movie, once the kids are already like growing up and stuff like that, you think about like, wow, there's just some things that you kind of grow out of, right? But it's okay if, let's say, a community um kind of looks the same, maybe it's the same faces or stuff like that, but that you can see how you've been through so much together, and that right there, it just builds that foundation that no matter what, we can all have each other's back, through thick and thin, so I really did appreciate how the storytellers in these movies, like, they put everything together, to help kids. But I know as an adult watching these movies again, I got like a different idea of what the movie's really about. It's not just about toys, but it's, the story in it and how you can see yourself part of that. But, to close this, to be a leader, there's just a lot of things that you have to, keep in mind of, and then just always having an open mind, because not everything remains the same, stagnant. You have to flow and move along with the changes. And once you do that, your community then sees that, and they are comfortable as well.
Jasenia, you brought a fascinating point right there. I mean, all of it was rich, but when you said that at the end, that the community sees it as well, it brought back to me how when Woody had done what he did to Buzz Lightyear, that it was apparent in his mannerisms, in everything that he was doing, that something was off, and the community felt that, and the community experienced that. Um, and this idea that we think that this is only an internal struggle, it's really experienced all around us, right? It permeates right through us, that everyone goes out, because it does affect how we talk, how we respond, and how we act with others, because we have sort of like this hyper awareness that I better act the part. And there's a loss of authenticity, right? So there seems to be this push that we need to, be authentic in everything that we do. And when these centering pieces are there, we have to learn to be authentic and all of that. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. The community senses, the community feels, right? You can't hide from anyone. Someone's gonna know. It's going to be felt. So thank you for that.
Yeah, let's also take this moment to lift up the chat right quick. Raphael contributed, tradition is not a handing down of dead fixities, but an invitation to further development. This actually was taken out of a book called The Orphic, if I'm not saying it right, Orphic Voice, Poetry and Natural History.
That came out of Yesenia's piece, because she said this struggle with tradition. What do we hand down? What do we instill? And I've been, that's been, that verse, that particular line has been running through my head, because I think, once again, this is what Yesenia was talking about when we talk about church and things like that. There's two traditions that they want us to engage in. One is fixity, right? You have to believe this. But they are also asking us to say, how do we engage a world around us? I want to throw in, and Aaron, you've probably read it. If Yesenia you haven't, you should. Dale Urban's text. Oh man, rendering account, something like that. I'll get it later. He focused on the communion table, and he says, if we were to hold on to the ritual as it has to be, wine, and it has to be bread, and it has to be this way only, without the realization of context and what other foods and realities of that place, then it's really dead, right? It has no real symbolic power in the taking. It's more of, I have to do this to get through it. And he goes, but we're not dealing with dead fixities. We want to really show this otherworldness, right? That comes by way of communion. and its symbolic powers. And he goes, so if the main food or the basics of life for that community was rice, then rice would be a central aspect of communion, because rice is that essentialness of life, and there's a divineness within us that's so essential that we must take in. And if we do not, what happened? And the same thing goes with that wine. If there isn't and there's something else, sake, yeah, sake. This idea that it flows through us, it affects us all, is so powerful. But if we hold on to the fixity, right, trying to fixate and say, this is it, and this is only it, it's dead. It's stagnant. And I'll repeat those things. Sorry, it's just exciting stuff. Let me.
Oh, good stuff. Good stuff. This is all great. Thank you so much. And in the editing, we'll got the book, but the book is Christian Histories, Christian Traditioning, Rendering Accounts by Dale T. Irvin. That was back in '98. Definitely worth looking into in that context. Looking beyond what we think is tradition. Thank you for also bringing that up. Tradition is not just tradition. It's not one thing. Like there's things about these traditions that need to be continuously under development, or dare we say continuously in process. And it just hasn't been as much. Maybe there's been like this hold up, there's a clogging or something, but the process is not going through, it's being held up. It's a build up somewhere, Thank you for that. But getting back to today's theme of discussion, let's start talking about meta spirituality and the context of community. Like, is it even possible to formulate or say that one has already been formulated, or a series of communities have been formulated that are emulating this idea of meta spirituality, right? We were saying earlier on in today's session, before we were graced with Raphael's presence, we were talking about meta spirituality and how it really symbolizes something that no one can put flagship on. They can't claim it and say, this is what it is. Instead, we've stumbled upon something of like a universal question, right? It's kind of like a stop point. And when you stop here, you ask yourself, is it possible to be part of community, a healthy community, and still uphold your own beliefs and perspective on spirituality, theology, right? I think this is where we start adding the prefix meta to things, words, ideas, symbols, right? We are definitely in that day and age where we're adding meta to something, and the meta is to symbolize various things. It all doesn't mean the same. And a lot of great writers are writing about this topic and using meta, but they're all not using it in the same prefix understanding. They're all using it differently. And so we interpret this as, a theopoetic, approach to this idea of meta spirituality. So we want to make it very clear up front that even though we may have written things in the past about meta spirituality and even given definition to it, that's not us claiming that's it. That's us saying, that's how we interpret it. That's how we see it from our vantage point, from our life experience. It's an add to, and so that's why we really want to take this time to open it up to see what are your views, your ideas. Maybe even if you had questions, let's talk through this so we can start developing for ourselves the idea of meta spirituality. And is this space or the public space community doing that in some form or fashion? So what do you guys think? There's no right or wrong here.
I think public space can offer that. It's very inclusive, feels inclusive. It's non-traditional in a way where, as you can see, you have between film, it's like a different way of expressing an idea. And then also, just like other ways that we can agree or disagree, but at the same time, keeping the space still feel safe. Again, like there is no right or wrong answer. No one is here to feel judged or to, judge someone else. It's more like a learning experience.
Thank you for that.
I've written on this. I was invited to write a piece on Kirkanian's pluralistic theology. And one of the questions that I engaged him with was, and particularly this piece, there's always a fear that if I engage something and I accept it, I lose myself. I think every religion has components of it that says we cannot lose this. We cannot lose this. My thinking, with my process thinking, says anything that we engage in changes us. Whether we negate it, whether we reject it, or we accept it, or we accept certain aspects of it, we are completely changed and therefore are fighting to reassess our values, our way of thinking, and our beliefs, and even our metaphysics. So I think my first component, the meta spirituality, is that sort of next phase of, we are constantly shifting our ideas. We can argue and say, this is my faith, or these are what I believe, but they're not, because we're constantly having to renegotiate how we argue things, right? So that tells us this thing no longer works. This way of arguing no longer works. This way of thinking can no longer work. And I have to go deeper, or I have to look at it at another facet. And so it's the struggle to hold on to that. If I can go back to the Toy Story and that community part, it's like Woody trying to hold on to being a center. And so that posture could be, I would almost argue, arrogant, but I'm going to throw another wrench in it. This is how I'm thinking. I think this is a dilemma that we fight with when we're Latinos, and saying, here I am, I'm a Puerto Rican, I'm a Cuban, I'm Dominican, and I need to be able to declare that I am, because we're losing some of that. And yet we're fighting, I think, as you were saying, Yesenia, once again, it goes back to this idea of tradition. We have to engage with this future part that's calling us or moving us forward. We have to come to grips with future, with futurity, with the technological advancements, and everything that comes with it, and the dilemmas and the situations that are happening in the now. DeSantis, Trump, and all of these other scary things. We don't want to fall into becoming like sheep, in the pejorative sense that we just follow along. But we want to be thinkers, theopoets, and thinkers that introduce these social justice themes and these components to say, wake up, people. We need to wake up. And so to go back and to stop, I think what meta spirituality does, it decenters us. And it says our spirituality is important because it has shaped us as who we are. But we need to realize that there are other spiritualities with these other experiences. And I think if we're going to enter into this next phase and the next step and furthering ourselves, we need to accept that and allow that to change us. Now, that doesn't stop us from our traditions. Our traditions are still going to be there, because that is the entryway to understanding our voices of the divine, right? But it should never hinder the others. And then we should work on that next phase, which is, now we know each of our spiritualities and experiences. How do we begin talking about or letting go of the things that aren't really what we thought were important? That's a harder discussion to have, because that is, once again, and I'll use this Toy Story piece, I'm glad we're talking about it, that decentering. I can no longer say or I'll argue that we should not be the only ones who say what the values are if we're trying to be a community. That there has to be both community and self in that. I'll pause there.
No, yeah, thank you. You bring up very good points, very introspective points. Yeah. So even with that being said, we love what you said, and thank you for weaving in the movie. This language is really developing. We do see a lot of this in Toy Story 1. Just talking about Toy Story 1, we saw it even in our own life, ourself as Woody, ourself as Buzz, and we thought that was interesting. Between these two characters, we saw ourselves at different times in our life. And when we came to seminary, we were more of Woody. We had these embedded theologies, we call it, right? And so before coming to seminary, my idea of what a Christian is was based on my experiences among Christians, doing Christian rituals such as going to church, reading the Bible, praying in the specific forms or what have you. When we get to seminary, that's when we started realizing, oh my gosh, there's so many layers to this onion, like it's all Christianity, right? Like it's all God. We had to go through a bit of turbulence to realize that our religious trauma is not a seed of violence or hate, that our religious trauma is a seed of empathy. To sit there and say, you slapped me in the face repeatedly. My first immediate question is why? What inspired you to smack me? So that's kind of where we're at in this thinking process. And Toy Story really puts us kind of there with Woody in conflict with Buzz. And like you were saying, Woody was really challenged with this. Like everything was great. Life was great until you showed up. I remember the scene when they're both at the gas station trying to get to Pizza Planet. And they're underneath the this freighter, this gas truck, fuel truck. Woody is going in, he's angry. He's like, this is all your fault. Like, I just want to go back to how things were in Andy's room. And we hear this echo of Andy's room, Andy's room. And what does Andy's room even symbolize and represent? The things that, we keep in tradition. This theopoetic limitation that all life is in this room. Everything happening outside the room, don't worry about it. Everything in this room, that's the most important thing. That's your world. That's your universe, And it's so cute and adorable to see that, opening the movie, Andy's playing with these toys, and this could be looked at as like, he always gives them meaning and purpose, and it's different depending on the story he's playing, like cops and robbers, or and then you see Mr. Potato Head is always like this villain, so to speak, right? One eye, whatever, and then Woody is always this symbol of a hero, right? And so we also thought, well, dang, like this whole idea that I'm good is that question. And Woody started thinking, am I good? Am I good enough? Like he needed something more, so he brought Buzz. You know what I mean? And this kind of perception really leads us down dark avenues of thinking, right? And we start taking it out on ourselves, and we're judging ourselves and bullying ourselves, abusing ourselves. Woody's like, damn it, if only I could get rid of Buzz. Like, that's not a solution, bro. You know what I mean? Like, so he had to really go through this journey of, Buzz coming along doesn't take away from me. My value wasn't depleted. I'm not, less valuable. I'm not less anything. It's just an add-on, It's interesting because our personal experience, we had that in the church, we used to go around to different churches. We had different friends that, had churches. And, you always get the routine, come to my church Sunday, anytime. So we would always take people up, our friends, take them up on their invites and go visiting different churches. And when we went to different churches, we got that experience of we were Buzz and the congregation was Woody. And it was, at the time, we were younger and more naive. We just didn't understand what was going on, and we would say, it couldn't be us, right? But it was. We were this representation of something different. And when tradition comes in contact with that, this is where the rubber meets the road for us. This is where we think people need to start expanding upon and not run away or be afraid of, but, take time and patience and discipline to think through it. If this new thing is coming in contact with this traditional thing, it must be for good reason, right? We can't really preserve a lot of hypocrisy in our thoughts and theology too. Even our spirituality. If our principles and values are built upon a set of, steady patterns and beliefs, why would we ultimately, immediately just revert to something different? Like, the love of God is for everybody. Yet some people believe that, gay people cannot be part of that love. Like it comes to this craziness. It was skin color before that, It's just these things we do to each other to really exclude us. And that's why in the topic of community, we're not just thinking about like our local community only. We're thinking about the larger communities that we're in, the layers of human community, society, global community. When we're talking about things that are happening in the world right now, it affects everybody now on a larger scale because internet has brought everything together, right? And we've established this large global community network, but staying on the topic of, Toy Story and how the story is really like a parable, a very good, in my opinion, very good theopoetic example of the micro to macro of a community, right? In lamest terms, that's all it is. It's not meant to be looked at as literal. It's meant to be looked at as an analogy. And that's something that we can say, wow, this kind of replicates a larger pattern. Like, isn't that interesting? Why is that happening? Or why isn't it changing? Why is that pattern still going like that? And we're not getting the results that we desire. And this also lingers into religious trauma thought, religious thought period. The things in which we believe in or believe on are from antiquity, if you would, very ancient. They've been around a very long time. This happened long ago. But we have to ask ourselves, isn't it possible that information can change and adapt? Because isn't it possible that we didn't get all the information at once? Is it possible that our ancestors and generations of humans before us got samples of truth and put together the best they could at that time? And maybe we're in a time where we're getting bits and pieces of more information. And this is where it gets interesting, this meta, right? This meta of bridging tradition with considered new, And so watching Woody and Buzz go at it is like a meta modern or meta spiritual process, right? How do we come out negotiating that, that's okay and that's okay? Like, you don't really got to change so much. We have to change and accept more. Like, there's things that happen in the past that we're not fully aware of. If you were presented with that information, we have to be open to say, we got to consider that, kind of thing. And we kind of see that transition from movie 1 to 4 with Woody as a character. And Buzz is always a good friend and reminder, right? He's always reminding good old Woody, like, come on, Sheriff. And we love that, like this encouragement of friendship that Woody and Buzz develop too is important because it's not a gender thing, but it's a relationship thing. Like, community is about this network of relationships. It's not about just accumulating or gathering bodies, for a particular amount of time, And I think today we kind of, start thinking like that, right? Like, places, in order for them to be relevant and successful, they have to have a lot of gathering, a lot of followers, a lot of subscribers, a lot of, so we're kind of looking at value like that, and we think that even throughout the series of Toy Story, you see these concepts, how Woody interprets value changes, like he now values Buzz. That's a big deal comparing to how the movie started, with movie 1. And then jumping to movie 4, Buzz and Woody's pals were barely in the picture, which are symbolic, right? Like this, he was going inward, deeper into himself, this isolation, solitude, which that's what we struggle with, as humans thus far. And we understand we need solitude, but we need community. Like, we can't have one without the other. Like, there needs to be some sort of balance between understanding ourselves in maybe isolation or solitude or silence, what have you. This is the absence of many loud noises, but community is the loud noise, right? It's the chaotic noise. Like, we're New Yorkers, so like that loud cab noise in the background is kind of like our ASMR, puts us to sleep. We're right at home kind of thing. Hey yo, whoop whoop, like all these weird noises together is a very soothing rhythm to people that live in New York for long periods of time, like it puts us to sleep. And then when we go to visit someplace out of New York and it's silence, it's like, this is scary. I don't feel comfortable. What the hell? All I hear is crickets, or an owl or something. Like, they're weird noises, So in that analogy, we see that we need to develop, this kind of dance, this fluid dance of a little bit of both, back and forth. and it's a continuous process, a dance that doesn't end, But yeah, what do you guys think? Thoughts, ideas?
Yesenia, do you want to go first? I don't have much. I think, we're along the same wavelength. I could only, as you're talking, I'm looking through like my books. I have a couple of books here on the side because I was rereading some. But one of them that you reminded me of was it's the author's name is John Salas, but also it's repeated here in the Orphic voice. I've been seeing how everyone resonates here. That there's a need to navigate multiple worlds, because if you stick to one world, then you think that is the God all be all. So just to piggyback off of what you were saying, Aaron, Andy's room as if God, and this is the way, that there is nothing else. Just the fact that they're entering that outer world and didn't realize it, because I just need to go back to the one I need to, that there is a realization of an outside world, but I'm going to ignore it and try to go back, and then realizing he can't, and I got to figure out how to navigate this outside world, right? So I'm noticing that. But then the why I want to go back to the books was there's always this fight for logic and myth, and the problem is if you go to one or the other, you always kind of end up in a bad spot, right? Logic can knock out everything. Myth can leave you in a story world. And so you have, John Salas says, really, myth is made to walk these truths, right? He's trying to reestablish that mode of what myth is called to do. We're not meant to stay there or worship it and do these things. It's made to walk and be in communion with logic, and actually give it some concretization, right? You need to give it flesh. The word became flesh, if you want to use a Christian motif in John 1, right? And so, with that, to be in flesh means then to also be integrated in the universe, to be a part of that world. We're all made of stardust. Was that Carl Sagan? I don't know who said that, but that's really where we are. And so then the truths that we experience means that we have to engage with something other than ourselves. It's this back and forth. It's this collaboration, negotiation, argumentation, eroticness, because they're really deep, intimate parts. And you see a lot of that in the films. And I think that resonates with what I think all of us are really hashing out, the value of the aloneness and community that's required. And we see glimpses of it in Toy Story. I did want to just comment. I think it was a great thank you for bringing out the fact, it is a micro to macro sense. This is not only about the individual, right, an ego, but also saying, well, a community can have an ego. And if I were to concretize that, we see evangelical world as having an ego, saying we're right. Or, DeSantis saying I'm right and I need to, fight against what wokeness is, which is really a participation in the fact that we screwed up somewhere here in America. And we need to realize that no matter how many times we change the words, it's there, it's hidden, it's waiting to be done. So, there is that ego that we need to let go of. But I think that's a hard, really, really hard process when the rest of the world is now beginning to look like us. I just want to throw that in there. What happens when what we thought was right, we realize isn't right, but now everyone else is doing it? How the heck do you get out of that? So I'll pause there.
I thought about so many things while you were talking to us. I did picture balance. So when you mentioned the author, and you were talking about mysticism and logic. So kind of balancing these things out. And then I immediately thought about, well, what happens to folks that are trying to heal, that are traumatized? So they don't, like when we think about the people that, in a sense, are ego driven, maybe the community is that way as well, where it doesn't leave room for any other voice to come in. where it's like, no, well, this is what it is. We're the best. This is exclusive. So for you to become a member, you have to follow X, Y, and Z. And then, like I started to think about like, we do need to go back in order to like become aware of what happened in order to move forward. So then I also think about the climate where we're in now, where we see it everywhere, that it just seems like no one can't have a past, right? Because they have already taken on another persona that society has now agreed on that, well, now this is who they are. But then if let's say it's something that in their past, something that happened, that it's against all their beliefs of today, then that deems that person just like, well, this person doesn't fit in, let's not even give them a chance. And to me, I feel like that is a terrible mistake to make when you are choosing, or I don't know why this is sounding like politics to me, but when you are electing somebody that is supposed to be a leader, but the difference is, has the person become aware of their faults, right, that have affected other people? Are they aware of that? And did they start to work on that? There's a difference with that, and then just not dealing with that at all, and then just going about life, and then feeling like, well, I lost so much that now this is who I am. This is it. I'm already part of this community. They accept me. They say that everything, is forgiven, but is it? It's still there. It's lingering. I don't want to rant too much, but that's what I was thinking about, and how unfair it can sometimes be for people that are actually trying to really work on, just like their traumas, their past, making sense of it, just so they can find a place to belong now.
If I can say something really quick, whenever both of you talk, for me, I see a book open up, and it's a particular book, and then I know a reference piece that's there. I had taught a class on queer theory, and one of the books was on that. But you said politics, and it ends up being that, right? In one of the chapters, and I promise I'll get the name. It's actually one of the professors from Union. He wrote that chapter. I'm the Brazilian professor. But he said that there's three types of persons that work in the political, and it resonated with what you were saying. There's one that acts it out, that says, in order for me to get through it, I'll just be a part of it, and goes through the motions, and they know what the issue and problems are, but they go through it, and they're going to try to get what they want out of it, what they can get out of it, right? And that's the one you don't want. But there's so many of those, right? There's so many of those, like, okay, I'll be part of the system, and I'll work it out because I get what I can get. And he said, and then there's those that are in authority, and those are just enforcing those laws. And it's mostly because I just need to get what I need to survive, right? But it really never engages more beyond than I just have to follow the law. But they have a certain power and authority, because they have a power and authority over the people. They know what the law is, so they can enforce it. They're enforcers. And he says there's that third one, which is, I think, what you were alluding to, the ones that are really trying to do something. And he calls them liberationists, because they're the ones that are seeing what's there, refuses to be a part of it, and decides to stand up. But that's difficult, because that's like Christ, you're just ready to die, you're a martyr, and its effectiveness is tough. Is it effective? Is it not? That's a hard thing. But those three actors, or those three personas, I'll call them personas for me, really kind of play out, right, some of the difficulties that we have. There's some that are just playing to make sure that they make it in the world. There's those that have legal authority. They want the power and control, but they're not really challenging if it's wrong. I'm just here to follow it and enforce it. And those that are willing to wake up and be like, no, this is wrong. We need to do something about it. There's an injustice. And those are the ones that are decentered because they respond to the community and they see the needs of the community and do something about it. I'll pause there. Aaron, you might want to take the floor, Yesenia, if you want to continue. And I'm going to find that text so I can send it to you.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add really quick. We need decentered leaders, especially for the future.
And then you need to name what that looks like. Because a leader is always front and center. How do you, it's a question I pose that we need to further engage. What does a decentralized leader look like? So I'll leave just an example of what I always think is always my beginning point. Because of my Christian background, I always look that my leadership style is Nehemiah. I think he's an interesting example. If you haven't read that text, it's a short. Is it a short read, Aaron? Is it Nehemiah? Yeah, I think it's Nehemiah. I think he's an interesting example of what these centralized leaders are. You know, got a side job, got a vision, working with the people. I stand up when I need to. Other than that, I'm going to continue work. An idea of decentralized leadership, but it's more than that. I think there needs to be a larger probing of what that really means and what does that look like, and what are the the qualities that are needed for that. Because it's right. I think what you're saying is there's a constant battle of having to step aside, but take the brunt of it. Because leaders take the brunt, right? They take some really heavy shots. Let me quiet down. I'm sorry.
No, don't be. This is amazing. Yeah, I mean, we're at the stage of this dialogue today that we're transitioning towards the end to wrap up. But before we do, I guess the shift of consciousness should look like something focused on how do members and leaders in community continue to develop themselves. This is something that we struggle with still. We don't really have an answer, and there's no one answer. But we struggle with this because we think of, and we too have a upbringing in Christianity that we default to these stories, sacred texts, as a visual aid or as a theopoetic aid to kind of help people understand what we're saying. But this kind of inquiry of how does one continue to develop themselves but be in community, it really breaks beyond literal translation, right? It breaks beyond literalism. Like, we literally do not physically have to be in a community all the time, and this also allows us to challenge ourselves and play with the idea that community may very well be a collection of thoughts. For me, that's heavy. That's deep. That's deep. That we have to spend weeks, months unpacking that. Yes, thank you. Claudio Carvalho. How you say it?
I'm going to say it the Spanish way, but he's Brazilian, so he might say it totally different. It's Claudio Calvajes. Calvaljes. But I'm saying it with my muddled Spanish. He probably says it very different.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you.
And I'm going to get the chapter. I didn't mean to interrupt you. That's why I put on the chat.
No problem. But yeah, so when we're thinking about these things, we also always go back to the famous or well-known sacred text or myth of Moses, and we think of, how this character, this symbol was called to do something so great and beyond their self, that God called me to do some impossible task, And so we love imagining and thinking through this myth of relationship between divine and human, right? Moses represented this, human-like quality, not fully put together. You can interpret that as, not done, not fully complete. That's the human being process, right? Or experience. To be human, you could kind of argue, is not to be complete, right? It's to be this continuous process of organic experience and what have you. So like Moses for us capsulated that, because when Moses responds to God in this experience, this divine experience he's having, He's like, I don't know how to speak, right? And the story suggests that God says, well, don't worry, I provided you a speaker, your brother. And that's how we get like the high priest Aaron, being the speaker, the first house of representative for the community of people that were, in Exodus, traveling through the wilderness, so to speak, to get to the land of milk and honey. And it's just interesting to think about these things through Toy Story, because you can definitely see an exodus happening when they're moving, like you mentioned earlier, Yesenia. So, that whole experience itself is so scary, but how often do we think about that? Change was forced almost, right? Like there was no other choice, so to speak. Like this is gonna happen. So how are you gonna prepare for it? You got Woody talking about, all right, meeting everybody. The move is happening. We can't go back. We have to plan for it, so that it's a smoother process. And just to end on our thought, we love how the character Woody, portraying this leadership symbol, is constantly thinking about his community, thinking about the others. He's so selfless like that, right? Even though he was challenged with, being centralized and being the one, that had to be challenged a bit. But at the end of the day, he was always still thinking about the others. Of course, his first intention was, I got to get Buzz back so people are in good terms with me. Right. And that's real. We really resonated with that. That was a human response we felt like from coming from Woody. And then it turns into something else. Woody's like, we can't go back without you. And this may sound crazy, but we love when Woody is confined by the crate in that crazy boy's room. Woody starts going through this in this scene. He goes through this process we interpret as, just straight humility. He's letting go. He's like, you know what? I'm tired of just faking the funk. I'm tired of making it up as we go, which on a side note could symbolize, rabbinic Judaism, this way of traditionally staying in the same fashion and way, and he was just tired. And something happened where Buzz was duct tape strapped to the rocket and looks over. For me, it was like, I guess Buzz could hear it in his voice. Like the desperation was seeping in. He was giving up. And Buzz is kind of like, how could above all people you lose faith? You give up. If you give up, we've all given up. So like Buzz just snaps back too. Like, this is not about what I thought it was. This is about community. Right? He's like, we got to get back to our community, man. And I'm going to help you do that. And then through that process, you see Buzz and Woody like develop this really strong bond where Woody, you can hear it in his voice of acting. He's dependent. He can trust Buzz. And then Buzz develops this trust in Woody, where it's like now in the later films, they become almost inseparable. And it was very cute how Buzz had these intentional feelings towards Woody when Woody went missing. And I think film 3 to Al's barn, the owner. And it's just like Buzz had this feminine, it almost seemed like the spirit was moving through Buzz to say something's wrong. And he was like, look, guys, I'm really concerned about Woody. And everyone's like, oh, it's Woody, man. Like, it's fine. It's probably nothing. But he felt something, and it was because of that bond that was developed. So again, going back to this network of relationships and how they really get us to the point of where we, I think, want to go in terms of developing or existing in a community that is meta-spiritual, that accepts us for who we are, all walks of life, no matter what, regardless of preconceived ideas and notions and beliefs. It's really interesting because we love sci-fi movies. That's like our favorite genre. But when we're watching sci-fi movies, we're always thinking and imagining like what it would be like to encounter another species of life and then hear about or understand their experiences and then question my own. Like, does God work differently in different parts of the universe? Like for different species and different. So it's like this, we actually hunger for this interaction with others that are so different, and try to hear and understand their own spiritual outlook when they're engaging God, because, we don't have the flagship and ownership of God as humans, period. Like We're just putting together ideas from experience and perception and language. So all these things are limiting, right? And we're trying our best. And I think we got to remind ourselves of that. I think sometimes we get caught up in the hype. We figured it out. We landed somewhere. We're still traveling. We're still moving. We're still trying to figure this stuff out. And with that said, it's so humbling and honoring to hear you guys' experiences and concepts and responses, not only to this film, but just the topics we've been covering. Thank you so much for sharing this space of thought. We feel so recharged. Our spiritual battery feels very recharged from this engagement. You guys definitely brought it. Wow. Thank you so much.
Yesenia has an A game. She's rocking it.
I'm always trying to learn too. So I learned a lot today.
We're all learning. We're all learning. This is got some great minds here. Keep doing it. Phenomenal. The thought processes and what's being done. These conversations. Really honing in on that community part. So pivotal. With everything right now, everything's towards individualism. Make it for myself, and I think that's the problem right now. Everyone's individual. Everyone wants to make sure they have their own rifle. I'm just saying that as my little sarcasm there that comes out, but taking those rights instead of looking at the value and necessity of community and all of that. So this bringing it out to Toy Story is very interesting. A way of letting go of our egos.